making pizza is to make a poolish. A poolish is a equal parts water and flour. I recommend using tipo 00 flour, and this is what it looks like after you've mixed the flour and the water. Now this is 300 flour and 300 water, and then the next day when you make the dough, you want 60% hydrated water and flour. So that makes it 500 flour and 300 water. After you've combined it all, sit it out, sit the poolish out to start bubbling for about half an hour. And then once it's been bubbling, then you can throw it into the fridge overnight. Okay, so the poolish has been in the fridge overnight. So there it is. And there is the poolish. You can see that it's bubbled up quite a bit. So now you need to add in the remaining flour. So for a regular pizza dough, you're wanting about a 60% hydration. You can go a little bit higher, but 60% is the easiest to work with. If you're going for something like a focaccia, you'll probably go for a 75 to 80%. And the way to work that out is originally I put in 300 flour and 300 water. So 60% hydration would be the 300 water divided by 0.6, which gives you 500. So 500 minus 300 from the, because I already put 300 flour in, we just need an additional 200 flour. So I'll put 200 grams more flour in here and then knead the dough. Two other things that I'll put in with the poolish is a bit of oil, a bit of olive oil, and some salt as well. So you don't put the salt anywhere near the yeast, just dry yeast, because it'll kill the yeast. So you put it in at the end, and it's like half a teaspoon, I'd say, is how much I'm going to put in. So it's not a small amount, but it's not a lot either, just to give it a nice flavour, accentuate that, that flavour that's been developing overnight. Okay, so kneading is going to be a little bit sticky at first, but eventually it'll come together. And what the process that I do is I stretch it out and then roll it back onto itself, and then rotate it 90 degrees and stretch, and then roll it back into a roll. And just keep doing that, rotate, stretch, and then roll back, rotate, stretch. And so the idea is that you're trying to develop the gluten in the flour, in the dough, and that will allow for a stretchier, chewier dough, and allow it to hopefully make some nice bubbles in the crust. Now, once you've got it kind of like that, and once it looks like it's kind of combined quite well, then I start tucking it underneath into itself. So tuck under, and eventually you'll get a nice smooth surface on it. So see what I'm just tucking in like that. And on top it's getting smoother and smoother. Okay, and that's pretty nice there. So once you've done that, so I've been kneading for about 10 minutes or so until it's well combined. Okay, and so it's nice and smooth on top, and the inside's tucked well, then just kind of rotate it a couple of times, and that creates a nice little ball. Now I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil on the surface, and then just put some plastic wrap over the top so it doesn't stick, or try not to stick too much, and then that will just sit on the bench where it's in a reasonably warm location to rise. Okay, so it's been rising for just over a half hour. It's not a particularly warm day here, so it hasn't risen as much as I was expecting, and then we're going to make some balls out of it. And it's basically just pull it apart, and then the same process where you just tuck it in under itself, just like that. And the idea is I think the idea is to push air into it, and then seal it so that it has air inside. And see, that's getting a very nice smooth dough. Okay, and then the same sort of process again where you roll it around on the bench to give it a nice, pinch it so it closes nicely. You kind of want to capture all that air inside. You want it to be sealed, hopefully, when it's finished. And that's it, that's reasonably closed. And then we'll just let that rise. It's about just over an hour before I plan to start cooking it, so we'll just let it sit on the bench rising until it's ready to cook. So instead of using flour when you're flattening the pizza out, I highly recommend using semolina instead. If you've ever used flour, you'll know that it burns when it's in the oven or when you're cooking it. And this is the pizza after they have risen for a few hours. Bit of semolina on the bench. You drop it straight into the semolina on both sides so that it starts getting covered and not so sticky, and then you push from the inside out. And so you'll see that the bubbles are forming, so the air is kept inside. So you try not to touch the edges and leave a nice crust around the outside, which should be full of air. So start from one side and then push to the other side like that. Flip it over, rotate 90 degrees, do the same. Just with the ends of your fingers, and then you kind of turn it and you put your hand in there into a side and kind of pull it just a little bit so it stretches. And stretch and stretch, and you get it a little bit bigger, but try not to touch the crust around the outside, which should be full of air. And so there's the pizza. It's nice and crispy. It's got a great crust around it. Finished it off with just around the outside, usually the crust that's kind of dry and whatever, just a combination of a little bit of garlic and olive oil, and you just kind of brush it on over there and it gives a really nice flavour. That's the pizza.